Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Secure Talk. Secure Talk is brought to you by Adequest, your cybersecurity and compliance partner. My name is Mark Schreiner, and I'll be your host for this episode of Secure Talk. Today, we're going to be talking with Roshni Thuama, who is the head of cyber governance at Sift Limited. Roche is also an ambassador for the Global Cyber Alliance, and she's very active in the cybersecurity community. We're going to be talking to Roche about a couple of the most significant threats that she sees in the context of cybersecurity. Before we jump into the conversation, though, I want to let everybody know that Roche and her company, Sift Limited, have been very kind and gracious and have offered all listeners of the Secure Talk podcast a 15% discount on their services. How cool is that? I'll put more information in this episode's description. So if you'd like to find out how you can save 15% on this amazing business email compromise solution, please check out the description of this podcast and or go ahead and go to the Sift Limited website. Now, let's jump into our show. Hi, Roche. How are you doing today?
I'm well, Mark. Thanks for asking. Yourself?
Pretty good. We're in Thanksgiving Eve here in the U.S., which is kind of special this year because, we're not supposed to be celebrating Thanksgiving and everybody's supposed to be staying at home and social distancing and all that. We'll have to see how things plan out. Are you in London?
Yes, yeah, and we're in lockdown at the moment, and it's 2nd of December. But the sensible best practice is, don't do it. Just
right.
Keep your distance, wash your hands, and all of the good stuff. So.
I mean, I kind of feel like we're getting close, hopefully, to the end of this. Some people are, a lot of us, I guess everybody feels a little bit of impatience in terms of we want to get our life back to normal. But, in the U.S., we had our election, and it looks like we actually have a new president, and we have a vaccine coming globally, and hopefully we can just get through these next few months. Do you feel any kind of sense of anticipation there in the UK?
Mark, I'm massively optimistic. So we've got I know there were 2 vaccines on the US side, and there was one in Germany and Oxford vaccine, which apparently is going to be really inexpensive and to make, and then also to transport because it doesn't have to be kept at freezing. And I think that's a game changer. But we know that the best advice is then we need to maintain the social distance. We need to keep the masks on. But vaccine is that's step 1, right? Then we can return to social distancing with masks and move on from there. So yeah, I'm really, really keen. I didn't realize I'd miss queuing, but I do.
Yeah, right. Just standing in line and maybe chit-chatting with people around you, right? So, Exactly. Let me back up. This year has taught me a lot about the power of getting accurate information, when it comes to the pandemic or it comes to anything else. And we're living in a time where that's not always the easiest thing to do. And you actually made a comment or a post recently regarding the 2 things that are the 2 most significant threats that you thought were facing us in terms of cybersecurity. Could you kind of go back and talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I was a panelist on the Cybercrime and Counterterrorism Symposium with the NYPD, and I'm sitting alongside the FBI and New York City Cyber Command. And the question was, what are the 2 most significant cyber threats? And I said, of course, business email compromise is number 1. That's not disputed. And number 2, I saw as disinformation. It was in the run-up. It was in the run-up to the election. And the reason that I said that is not because I'm prescient. It's because we've seen this before, right? So we saw this in 2016 with the DNC hack with Podesta. But I suppose in order really to frame why I thought disinformation was so problematic is because if you look at the cyber landscape from purely commercial point of view, so we'll just move away from the election for one moment, it's really noisy. There's a huge amount of information and it's getting more opaque on a daily basis. And to give you some idea, okay, so you have your cyber assisted crime, your traditional crimes that have found a home on the internet. So your romance scams, you know, I love you, give me money. You have your cyber dependent crimes, the ones that fool the machine. And then you have your purely technical, those hybrid, so the so-called cyber enabled. But if you only take cyber dependent crimes as an example, so we're just taking one kind of not small section, but just one section, there's thousands of common vulnerabilities and exposures. And then that gives rise to millions of unique malicious objects. In 2019, the figure was kicking around about 24 million. That was an uptick of 14% on the previous year. And if you continue at that rate, within 5 years, the figure will be close to 50 million unique malicious objects. So there's no way for businesses to reasonably collate and crunch all of that data. And this is why the intelligence community is so important, because they can cut through all of that noise. They're a credible source, and they give you trusted, independent information. So they have access to information that's otherwise unavailable to the private sector, and they're a body of experts. My comment was in relation to the firing of Chris Krebs of CISA, and I was concerned that, so I didn't see that coming. I have to say that right out. I didn't see the disinformation continuing after the election. I thought what we were going to see more along the lines of what we'd seen in 2016. So you had the Podesta email dump of data with WikiLeaks. I think there was something in the order of like 20,000 or so emails. And then, of course, that created an awful lot of concern, which impacted Clinton's position. So I know you'll probably know this better than I will, but I think she was in a pretty strong position. And then the email thing happened, and then that kind of threw it. And I was worried we were going to see something like that again. But it's interesting because I've been thinking about this over the last couple of days. The firing of Krebs for telling the truth, I don't think technically it is disinformation. So disinformation is defined in two ways, really. So you have the British government definition, which is just deliberately misinforming for either for personal, financial, or political gain. Whereas Professor Thomas Ridd, who's a cybersecurity expert at King's College in London, specifically defines disinformation as having a political motivation. So that's the defining factor. If the goal, he talks about the goal, if the goal is to exacerbate existing tensions by leveraging facts and fakes, and ideally a disorienting mix of both, then that's disinformation. And so specifically, I was worried about that level of political warfare, that type of active measure. But I'm not sure actually if Trump's message of voter fraud can really be defined as disinformation.
Well, I mean, I think you can look at this from many different ways. One is anytime you create some kind of political instability or distrust in your political institutions, that also has financial ramifications and geopolitical ramifications. And what you've seen is that the Department of Homeland Security has taken this so seriously that they launched their Room Control website, because there's so much information out there and so much of it is disingenuous. I mean, it's just out there to confuse people. And then you have a huge segment of the population, not just in America, I think in a lot of countries these days, that people believe in some type of deep state organization. So there's already this, underlying distrust, and there are actors who want to kind of fuel that. And I totally agree, it's a threat. But when when the people who are set, who are there to kind of counter that, as Chris Krebs was doing and the Rumor Control website was doing, but when they lose credibility and actually are victims of a backlash for reporting the truth, right? I mean, I would say the majority of the people believe or trust that. But you've got a major problem there when you have an acting president. I don't want to go too deep into the politics here, but when you got an acting president that fires somebody for essentially being I wouldn't call it, it's not even a whistleblower. It's just somebody who's saying, hey, this information is verifiable, this information is not. And then it's a problem, because then who do you trust? And then it's just kind of like we go to the lowest common denominator. We've lowered the bar, and we live on a day-to-day basis of who's posting what on their favorite rumor mill or echo chamber. Sorry, that was my little rant. Go ahead.
No. Listen, look, I'm absolutely with you. So I think, look, it was definitely disinformation, but I'm a little bit worried that we're defining it too widely to include what Trump did. So like you said, so you had, before the election, the FBI and the intelligence community took the unusual step of publishing like a memo to say, this is a very safe election. We've dotted the I's, we've crossed the T's. Everything is an apple pie order. We're good to go. It's going to be the safest election in American history. And I have to say, if it's the safest election in America, if it's the safest election in American history, then in all likelihood, it is the safest election that's ever taken place anywhere in the world, right? So, look, it has been described as disinformation. So there's Yochai Benkler from Harvard. He, together with his team, looked at, where was this false narrative coming from, and they were able to laser in on, it started with Trump, it's being amplified by the media that tilts towards him, and that was it. It wasn't, it wasn't really coming from any other sources. But what I'm worried about is if we use disinformation for something as kind of infantile as this, then we risk diluting what disinformation really is. And I just wonder if we might not just come straight out and say that it was a lie, that on the one hand, you had Chris Krebs telling the truth based on all of the evidence. And then we don't try to whitewash what happened by calling it disinformation. I suppose that's really where I wonder if we shouldn't make the distinction between disinformation that's politically motivated by an adversary, and what we know the Russians did, in 2016.
Yep.
And have been doing for like nearly 100 years, right? So they're really, really good at this. But I might be arguing over semantics. For sure, it wasn't true, and the reason that we need to protect the intelligence community, I think, is because in cybersecurity, all of us are relying on them,
Sure. So what you're saying is calling a lie disinformation isn't in fact disinformation.
Yes. Yeah, I don't think it's at the level of like an active measure. So, it's the sort of the classic definition is that you have you take facts and a fake and then you disorient with both of those so that people can't distinguish.
Mm-hmm.
But it would have been very easy for people to distinguish what was true and what was not, and that I think is a bigger problem.
Because I'm sorry.
Well, so it's like we touched on like the vaccine. So I think that there's kind of almost like a bigger issue where people are presented with the facts, but will rather lean into the lie. And I don't understand why that's.
The vaccine thing to me is mind-boggling. You know what? And deep down inside, I'm a bit of a conspiracy theorist. I love it. I love me a good conspiracy theory. Okay, but But, I mean, some of the disinformation going around the vaccine, and, the nefarious motivations of the people who are bringing the vaccine to the world stage, and, some of the richest people in the world, and it's all a diabolical plot for them to, I've heard things as, to get mind control, to get our information, whatever that means. It was like, you can have my information. I'll take the vaccine. It's amazing. And we've had vaccines now for, I don't know, 180 years, 90 years. And then there's the argument, well, this has been rushed to the market and all under the guise of COVID and blah, blah. But it's amazing because there's just so much information out there. And I think life used to be simpler when we had our 2 daily newspapers in every metropolitan area, 3 major networks in the U.S., and in the U.K. you had BBC and your other news sources. But it was a relatively limited amount. And you can argue both sides of that, but life was definitely simpler back then, right?
Oh, I mean, yeah, 100%. You weren't scrolling every 2 minutes. Like, we're here in the UK, and, to get updates on Biden, on the US election, even though you couldn't expect any reasonable new material,
right?
Constantly checking, and then checking like multiple sources to see. And actually, I was guilty of a little bit of disinformation myself, but it was born of relying on the Associated Press, who called Arizona for Biden well before anybody else did. So I was calling the election based on the Associated Press, whereas an awful lot of the other news agencies held off on it. So, I mean, 100% life is so much easier.
Go ahead.
No, I was just wondering if we're not going to sort of return to that a little bit with, because as disinformation mounts and expands, then we're going to, I mean, we all understand that subscribing to legitimate news agencies is the safest possible option, rather than using social media as our source of information, right?
Yeah, I think there is room for a rumor control media, a trusted information source that doesn't have a political agenda one way or the other. And I got to say, I mean, I look at both sides, and both sides are guilty of furthering the agenda, their respective agendas. And then that plays out in social media where, it's just the echo chamber. People post things that make them feel good, and they ignore things that give them any kind of cognitive dissonance, so they want that positive affirmation. But because I've read so many articles about the collapse of the healthcare system. This is when I was in Japan, for example, and a friend of mine was the bureau chief for one of the major American newspapers, bureau chief for Japan and Korea. And he was posting articles about the imminent collapse of the Japanese medical system, and I was there in Japan, and I was like, I'm not seeing anything, and I have friends who are doctors and nurses. Nobody was say anything. And I asked him, I said, like, where do you get this from? And he's like, well, I was talking to the head of the JAMA, the Japan Medical Association, and they're convinced that it's going to collapse. And I was like, well, okay, people in large organizations always have different agendas and motivations. So I said, have you been out to any local hospitals? No. So I got on my bike and I went over to the largest hospital in Yokohama. And I was like, can I come in? Can I get tested? They're like, sure. I was like, are you guys busy? Are you busier than normal? And they're like, not really, no. It's like, so who can you trust, right? And I think there's a place for some type of news organization that will just give us the straight news, just report the facts. I don't know, call me old-fashioned, but
no, Mark, look, you're 100% on it. But we have, just this as a case in point, where you have Chris Krebs, highly credible, head of CISA, part of the Department of Homeland Security, hired by this guy who comes out and tells the truth. Access to information that is otherwise unavailable, has had his finger on a pulse. This is his job. It's like, you had one job to do, and he did it.
Right.
He said, in advance of the election, he said, we have no evidence that there's any interference. Then you have simultaneously, you've got this guy, Yochai Benkler, who's doing the research and saying the only guy who's talking about it is Trump. And it's his narrative that's being amplified. And then who did people believe? Did they believe the guy who told 24,000 lies over 4 years? Or did they believe Chris Krebs?
Well, people believe they hear what they want to hear and they believe who they want to believe, and it's amazing to me how you can have conversations with educated people and they base their beliefs oftentimes upon the party that they support, right? And I have to say I think both sides are maybe not equally as guilty, but guilty of spreading disinformation at various times. And so it both sides can, in America, unfortunately, we just have two sides, seriously. There are a couple third party options, but unlike the UK, I mean, how many political parties do you have in the UK?
Really, we only have two.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, okay.
Yeah.
So you recognize that. I mean, you're either with us or against us, and I think that actually kind of plays into this as well. Where if we had, maybe a 5 or 6, 7 different party system, you'd have to be a little bit more diplomatic and form a coalition in theory. But anyway, we're going off on a completely different area.
But can I just speak to your point? Because Sure. Actually, it seems to me, so from the UK, it seems that, it's you do have a huge amount of really good Republicans, albeit none of them appear to be in politics. But there's
that's what.
There's this huge movement which people we've been discussing. You've got your Republican voters against Trump. You've got your Republicans for responsible leadership or veterans for responsible leadership. They all seem to be you have this whole body. So actually, if anything, those guys have come off really well here, which is, I mean, you can cut that out if you want, but
no.
This whole episode, I don't think it's driven a wedge. I think what it's done is you've clearly got, an element, so that, you've got the Trump part, then you have classic Republicans who are, shuddering, and is it Mitt Romney?
Yeah.
You do have, and they're really shining through at the moment. So, just if there are any Republicans listening, they, it's not.
Some of you guys, some of you guys are okay, right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Actually, I just posted recently McCain's. What do you call it when you've accepted defeat?
Concession.
I'm sorry.
Concession speech.
Yeah, the concession speech. I'm saying, yeah, and he was super eloquent and gracious when he lost the election to Obama, of course, and he was praising President Obama, and I was like, wow, what a picture of class, and I think. I mean, this has nothing to do with cybersecurity. There's a tenuous tie to disinformation, but I think that there is something about acting presidential. I also think the media, though, has a role to treat the president's position with a certain amount of respect as well. And it's funny that the Governor Cuomo, who started, he who's obviously Democrat, but he was bickering with the press this week. He actually said something defending Donald Trump and said, well, he's had a really tough time because the press doesn't treat the position with as much respect as it should be or has been in the past. So it's kind of like we're going down this this rabbit hole, and it would be nice if we could switch, kind of reverse directions. So with that in mind, why don't we jump over to business email compromise? Tell us a little bit about, I mean, I'm pretty sure everybody knows what it is, but give us your definition, and then let's talk about some of the more serious threats that you're seeing.
Okay, so business email compromise is essentially when the bad guys exploit the vulnerability in SMTP, so the Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. And it has been, it's got about half a dozen names, which doesn't help, by the way. So it's, known as phishing. email account compromise, spear phishing, whale phishing, CTO, CFO fraud, Friday afternoon fraud. The list is endless. And so, when I was saying about like the noise in the cyber threat landscape, that contributes to it. So that's business email compromise, and it is number one. And it isn't number one and it's a neck and neck race. It is number one by a significant margin. And this is the intelligence community's report. And this is why I actually really felt the need to defend Chris Krebs, because we rely so much on the intelligence community and cybersecurity sector. And that's quite right. We talk about credible sources. These guys are up there. And on both sides of the Atlantic. So it's irrespective of whether you look at the FBI, who call it like the $26 billion scam, or you look to the National Cybersecurity Center here, which is parented by GCHQ. GCHQ is sort of like our NSA. They are listening guys. NCSC, they'll tell you, number one, it's phishing, and it is the starting point for 90% of targeted cyber attacks. So we mentioned Podesta, or I mentioned Podesta when I was talking about the disinformation. The way they got into John Podesta's was through a spear phishing campaign. And that was my concern, is that we would see more of that. And that's essentially what the problem is.
And is the reason... Is it because it's the human factor? I mean, that, most of these attacks just depend on somebody clicking on something they shouldn't. It's not super, super high tech. There's some social engineering that can be used. Is that the reason, or is it, why is it so prevalent?
Well, number one, it's really easy to do. So there's YouTube tutorials on how to do this that run to about 1 minute and 8 seconds. So that's... Yeah, right. So that's your learning time for that. And so number one, it's really easy. Number two, trust and identity, right? So if I'm able to hijack your identity, I can do anything that you can do now. And that's what business email compromise is. So people are trusting. They're not, when something comes in and it has like Mark Schreiner's name and it's got your domain on it, people go, oh yeah, that's Mark, right? Oh yeah, what do you want me to do? Might be something small, or it could be something like, hey, check this out, what I found on, Instagram.
Right.
But because they've been able to assume your identity, that's their way in. Oh, we see this all the time. Can I tell you my favorite?
Please.
Okay, so this is back in 2016 as well. This is obviously still ongoing, but there was a French construction company. It's called Vinci, and started the day out at worth 35 billion. And at about 9 o'clock in the morning, an email, a phishing email, went to Bloomberg, the news agency, and it said that the finance director had resigned following the discovery of a black hole in the accounting. They clicked on the link, everything looked right, they published it. Within 40 minutes, Vinci knew that there was something wrong because their share price was dropping off a cliff. So there's some interesting research been done on reputational damage to public firms. And the academics in that study said, okay, so what you would expect to see is a 7% drop on the initial news shock, further amplified 15 to 20% on the additional news flows. Within the day, it had gone from 35 billion to 28 billion off the share price. And it was a business email compromise. And it affected the market. It was, bad actors, we can assume, made a lot of money because they would have that insider information. Yeah,
they could sell it short, sell Vinci's stock short. So basically, just to make sure I understand this, somebody created a bogus press release or announcement. They did. Yeah. Vinci was not, and they sent that to AP or another news agency.
They sent it to Bloomberg. Yeah,
Bloomberg, excuse me, and Bloomberg didn't verify it. They just published it. So there's mistakes. It's the human error again.
Yeah, I know you say that, but to be fair to Bloomberg, and by the way, the market, so the French regulatory found the same that you did, that they had come up short. But I would argue that Vinci have a duty to their shareholders and to all of the stakeholders to take reasonable care, and that they could have avoided this by deploying a global industry standard, right? So, there is a fix for this.
Oh, because the email came from Vinci. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So I'm just connecting the dots on this. Okay, I thought that Bloomberg just got this anonymous announcement, but it actually came from a Vinci address. Okay, wow. Yeah,
right.
So yeah, you're right. That's a tough one. Yeah.
Well, it is, because if you're a journalist and you're looking at it and they've got the domain and everything looks like it's an apple pie order, well, who are you going to then verify it with? The person who's, the comms director whose name is at the end of it? No, you would just think it was legit.
Right.
Anyway, I have huge sympathy for Bloomberg. The French regulators had less sympathy and fined them 5 million. But I think that if they had appealed that, they might have had some joy in shifting it.
That's amazing, and I'm wondering, because usually when something like that happens, the financial regulators, they are also able to see who sold stocks short in large amounts, right? And sometimes they can track back, but I'm guessing that anybody was smart enough to pull this off, they probably found ways to mask who was doing the actual selling. And gosh, the wheels are turning here. I got to go watch some YouTube videos on.
Can I tell you what? I thought that exactly. I thought, okay, you're going to have a really large data set, of all of the transactions, but it's still a closed data set. It's not infinite, right?
Right.
It's big, but and you would think that the answer lies in there somewhere. Like, who were the first movers? How, who made the most? I don't know. I'm with you. I'd like to dig around in that data. But
so what I think all individuals and organizations should be concerned about business email or just email compromise. What can companies do? I mean,
okay.
Can you throw just technology? Do you do training? I mean, what do you do?
Okay, so this is super easy. So I am going to rely on NIST recommendations. So there's a NIST recommendation for trustworthy email. The US Department of Homeland Security, one of my favorite group of people, they issued the binding operational directive. And I will give you the answer in a moment. And then the NCSC worked with the British government and published the minimum cybersecurity standards, and all of them, so NIST, binding operational directive, minimum cybersecurity standards, tell you to defend against business email compromise, you need to deploy DMARC, the global standard protocol. So when people hear the word protocol, they should understand, right, this is a building block of the internet. And if it's at protocol level, it needs to be done. But we're in a really good position, I think, because, first of all, the American government, 80% of federal agencies have adopted DMARC protocol. There's been, widespread adoption across the legal sector, but there's a new email standard coming in Q1 2021, BIMI.
Okay.
Yeah. So BIMI is it's a brand identifier, really. And what it does is, once you get DMARC, so shall I tell you a bit more about DMARC first?
Please, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so DMARC it looks to two existing mechanisms. So it looks to SPF and DKIM. And SPF, Sender Policy Framework, is a bit like, if you're not on the list, you're not coming in. And then DKIM acts a little bit like, a card for a hotel where you have one half the password and then the door has the other half, and then you put them together. Yep. That's the best way to describe those. So those two mechanisms need to work in order for the DMARC protocol to be effective. And what you do is you start off in policy equals none. That's the intelligence gathering phase. And you don't have to get users to do anything. You can simply go into wherever you've registered your domain, so 123 or name.com or GoDaddy or wherever you've bought that, and drop in a line of code, and then you start to report. And it's basically like kind of putting a flag on your email and saying, wherever you see this, send me information, and then you get a full report on all of the senders, so both good and bad. And then you start to see the extent of your problem. And from there, once you know how big your problem is, that's when you start to address it.
Because you're seeing emails from your domain that are going out, but not from your organization. So is that what you're saying?
Precisely.
Okay.
So you already see everything, all of your legitimate stuff you can have eyes on, right, as the administrator. It's people who are sending emails beyond your network boundary.
Got you. So
then
somebody on the other side of the planet, they're sending out thousands of emails using your domain. Obviously, something's fishy here.
Yeah,
no pun intended.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right, and you want to shut that down.
Right. Okay, and then and tell us about Beanie.
So what Bimmy is going to do is it's going to alert client. Well, essentially what will happen is when you look to your inbox now, everyone who has DMARC to the safe harbor, so into policy equals reject. So this is a kind of a 3-phase journey with it, but you need to get to policy equals reject. That's where the protection is. And Bimmy will, when you open your inbox, emails that have DMARC at that secure level will be able to land in your inbox with the company's registered logo. So what that means then is that emails that are coming into your inbox that don't have that logo, you should treat with caution.
I like that. I actually haven't seen that yet. So that's pretty impressive, and it sounds very user-friendly.
Yeah, so it's really, really clever. There's a company called Entrust are doing the certification side of it. And then, and we're doing the DMARC side.
Excellent. So tell us a little bit more about RedSift in your solutions.
Okay, so RedSift, we are about 5 years old. Just a little bit of background for anybody who knows. Our CEO was the brains behind the Shazam app, which is where, so Randall, who's the COO, Raul, who's the CEO, and myself all worked at Shazam in the early days and went
That's the app that allows you to identify what music you're listening to?
Yes.
I love that app. That's awesome. Because I can't remember. My memory is so bad. And I'm like,
Well, you can thank Raul, my CEO. That was him. He is the one that figured out how to do that.
That is so cool. Solve a problem. That's all you have to do is solve a problem, right?
Well, it was a bit more than that because, of course, there was there were no such thing as apps 20 years ago. So it was a long conversation,
That's great. So he went from that, and how does that? Yeah, go ahead. So
he built another company along the way and sold that, and then Raul and Randall and together with Deepak, our CTO, built this very clever data crunching platform, and that's really the wheelhouse. And then to demonstrate how good the RedSift platform was, they spun up a solution to DMARC using our platform. And what they did was they said, well, what's the biggest problem? They looked to the intelligence community and said, okay, so it's business email compromised by a considerable margin. It's very difficult to configure without actionable insights. And they built the OnDemARC platform. And that was our first product. And what it does is it just simply makes it really easy. So instead of you creating your own DMARC record, our OnDemARC platform will create your unique DMARC record. And then all you do is it takes 10 minutes, you drop in that line of code, you make sure to name it _DMARC, you put it in against your TXT record, shut it down, and then you just walk away for 10 days. 10 days later, you come back and then you log into the platform. And that is when you will see in really clear, so we've got, maps, and all of the data is crunched in a way that even people who are not technical, like me, can really understand what it means. Yeah. So, there's like a map of the world and you'll have red dots. The bigger the red dot, the more bad emails are coming from that area. And the aim of the game is to just have green dots so that only legitimate email senders are sending email on your behalf.
That's great. And like, do you have customers globally right now? Or, I mean, tell a little bit about your business.
Okay, so yeah, we have them globally. We are well entrenched. We dominate in the legal sector. So in the UK, especially, we've got the Prime Minister's office. We've got large global companies. At the beginning of the pandemic, we reached out to the World Health Organization and helped them clean up their email. And we've got global companies. So we've got telecommunications, mobile companies. We've got oil and gas businesses. We've got one of the largest companies in Europe that no one's ever heard of that has thousands of, so they're in online retail. So they've got thousands of domains. Mm-hmm. With multiple issues. So, it can get very clunky if you've got lots of domains, and then we've got those, and we're in the United States and we're doing pretty well. We've got offices in San Francisco and I want to say Atlanta, but that I might be right. Could be Austin.
It starts with an A. It's a big country, and I'm on the West Coast, so everything back there is just all back there. It's all right. No. So let me ask you this, because there are a lot of different business email compromise solutions on the market. Anti-malware, anti-phishing, and so there's a lot of noise out there. What's your angle or your unique selling point? I think you kind of already gave it to me, but in the context of the competition, what would you say?
So I would say, in terms of other products, if I look at what you really want to do is you want to protect your own reputation and your own brand. So some of the anti-phishing products are protecting other people's reputation and brand, mm-hmm. right? So they're catching other bad actors coming into your inbox. We do have a solution for that. That's called On Inbox. But with DMARC, how I would differentiate us from other businesses offering DMARC solutions, there is a problem with SPF, right? Let me tell you. The Center Policy Framework was devised in about 2006, and it was pre-cloud. So they thought 10 lookups was more than anybody would ever need, right? Mm-hmm. But we're in 2020 and everyone's going to the cloud, and you have email sending services. So, you might have Salesforce and HubSpot and just all of these other services that are sending emails on your behalf. Well, what one sending service might have 7 lookups and another one might have 4. And then what you're doing is you're busting the SPF 10 limit. So because they limited it to 10, what that means is that once you bust that limit, your email delivery will randomly fail. And then you might say, for example, if you're in a law firm, you might have a contract, time is of the essence, you hit send, it goes from your outbox, but it never arrives.
That would be annoying.
Wouldn't it though? Yeah. And then you've got the other side saying we didn't get it, and you've got the evidence that it was sent, but actually it's lost in the ether. And there's no way for a business to prioritize. So say, for example, if you're working on a big merger or something like that and say, well, we definitely need this team's email to deliver, so we're going to give them access rights, or you can't do that. So you have to manage the SPF 10 limit. And we have a really elegant solution which allows businesses to add in as many products as they want, and there is no upper limit. So if they need 20 sending services and they've got like 144 or 200 SPF lookups, we manage that with our dynamic SPF. And the brains behind the Shazam app, Raul, he's the clever guy who came up with this dynamic SPF.
How smart is this guy, man?
When I tell you, he's off the chart. And, like, I'm not dim, but I'm constantly, it's a real privilege to work with Raul and Randall there.
Yeah, it's nice to work with people that make you feel dim.
No, they're next level, these guys. Yeah,
that's inspiring. Actually, that's great. Hey, we're getting a little bit short on time here. I want to jump tracks because I meant to do this earlier, but I noticed that you are an ambassador for the Global Cyber Alliance.
I am, yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about your work there? And then I have a question in terms of a follow-up, but just tell us a little bit about what the Global Cyber Alliance is and what you do. And then I got my question.
Okay, great. So I'm an ambassador with Global Cyber Alliance, and Global Cyber Alliance was an initiative that was formed by City of London Police, District Attorney's Office in New York, and Centre for Internet Research. And they understood that they needed to, that there was an education and awareness gap, and people needed trusted information. So what Global Cyber Alliance do is first of all, they develop products and solutions, but mostly what they do is they advocate and educate. So they'll explain what the problems are, and then they'll go to governments, for example, and they will tell governments, look, this is the best practice. These are big problems. These are solutions. Like, for example, DMARC is one of the protocols that they really want to see land. And then they advocate and cheerlead and do all of the heavy lifting so that all of the cybersecurity providers can then answer the call if somebody needs our help.
Sounds like a very worthwhile organization. Is it truly global, or because you mentioned some different agencies in the UK and then also in the US. Does the reach expand beyond that?
Yeah, so there's 11 ambassadors, and I'm going to not do them justice now, Mark. So you've got Saudi Arabia, Singapore. They've done really amazing work with the Singaporean government. France, very recently, they've started to engage with, of course, the United States. Craig Newmark, the Craigslist guy, is a big sponsor of these guys. They do fantastic work protecting journalists, so they'll give those guys like a toolkit. They have toolkits for small businesses. They were involved in protecting the election. So I found myself at a webinar, sort of a town hall with all of these election experts. I was surplus to requirements, in all honesty, but it was really encouraging to see how robust their measures were. And, GCA played no small part in that. So it is truly global. Australia, New Zealand, you've got the Australian Signals Directorate who've mandated or recommended DMARC, because I mentioned the British and the American government. And in New Zealand as well, they've done fantastic work. And there's a guy there, Tony, whose surname I wouldn't dare pronounce. He's also doing really phenomenal stuff to make sure that all, we talk about cybersecurity being holistic. Mm-hmm. And that just means that really, as far as I'm concerned, that if we're not all in this together, all making sure we're protected, well, that's the angle that these bad actors are going to come in.
Roche, I 100% agree. And that's part of the reason we have this, or maybe the main reason we have the Secure Talk podcast going on, is it's important for everybody in this industry to share as much information as often as possible and as effectively as possible. To that end, I really appreciate you coming on the show, and it has been great talking with you.
Mark, thank you so much for inviting me. Take care.
Welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance. Join our hosts as they discuss a wide range of topics and speak with leading cybersecurity, technology, and compliance experts. Now is the time for Secure Talk.